Today, we're going to be building a custom registration page that you can use to log in with Next.auth using the credential provider. Hi, I'm Ethan, a principal software engineer who's been writing and shipping code in the cloud for over a decade. I sold my last SaaS company in 2020, and now I'm helping people like you build yours. So if you like what you see and want to support me, go ahead and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, Next.auth doesn't care how a user gets inputted into our system. That's outside of the scope of authentication. We're going to build a nice form with Next, Tailwind, and TypeScript, and then hit an API on the server side to get the user into our database. And then we'll go ahead and test it. And of course, all of this in the brand new app directory. Let's get started. Now to start, we're going to jump in. We already have Next.auth set up and we already have Tailwind set up. If you need videos for those or tutorials, go ahead and check the description or one of the links bouncing around and you can get caught up right where we are. Here in our application, we have a basic app and we have a dashboard that's been protected. And the dashboard is protected by middleware, which is how we're doing the authentication. And of course, we have the authentication set up with Next.auth and the credential provider here. And it goes through and checks to see if the user has a valid credential and it's all saved in our database. So the next step here is to obviously create a user and put them into our database. And we're going to do that through the registration page. Now, when I start projects like this, I like to get some inspiration from companies that I think do this really well. There are a lot of great companies out there, and some have billions of dollars that they put into things like design. So let's go check out a few of those. Here is Stripe's registration page. It's pretty straightforward. They have some marketing content on the side, and then they have their main form here. It's got a nice card look. It has a nice shadow around it. It's capturing the email, name, the country, and password. It also has some nice hints and things to make sure the user's entering valid information. And if you enter invalid information, it'll make sure that it highlights that. So this is a pretty good form. Another great registration form to check out is Mercury, which is a banking startup. Here, they have first and last name, your email, and your password. Again, pretty straightforward, nice focused card view, really make sure the user's only looking at what's important. The registration page for your app is a portal. It's a way to get people into your application. You don't want to crowd it with a lot of other fluff and other things going on. When the user goes to register, they're getting into your system and you really want them to focus at that task at hand. Remove everything that could be distracting. All right, so back in our code, let's dive in and let's get started. The first thing we need to do is create our new registration page. So we'll just call it register and it'll be a page. And now we'll set up the basic structure of our page. And now we can test it. All right, we have the basic registration page and it's working. So now the next thing is going to be to create a card view, put it in the middle of the screen and add a little bit of shadow to it. Let's add some padding. And some rounded corners. All right, not bad. Now we have a card in the center. Obviously, we need a little more content here, but this is the basic rough idea of what it's going to look like. From here, we're going to have to create the form that the user will enter this information. Now a form is going to have user interaction, so it's going to be a client component. So we'll have to put that into a new file and then import it into this one. We can co-locate our code. And now go ahead and take a look at what it looks like. All right, here's our register form. Although the inputs don't look fantastic because we don't have any styling applied to them yet, but this is the basic functionality that we're looking for. Before we go through and actually build it, let's actually focus on making this look pretty good first, and then we'll go ahead and add the API functionality next. Now, this video is not about building UI components. Let's do that later. Instead, we're going to go ahead and borrow some from some other libraries. I'm going to jump into Shad CN's UI library here and go ahead and get started. And he has a bunch of great components that we can just copy into our project once we set up some dependencies. All right, we're good to go. Now we can start dropping in some components. For this, we really just need the user input and perhaps a label for the text input, and then a button to register. Let's go ahead and add the button to start. And now the input. And lastly, the label. All right. With our 3 components added, we can now jump back to the form and use the new components in them. Let's go ahead and see what it looks like. All right, much better, although we need to fix some of the spacing here, add in a couple of labels, and then maybe a placeholder as well. If we jump over to see our inspiration, it looks like there might be a couple of placeholders, but not much. We have email, password as labels. Let's go ahead and add some labels and then fix the spacing as well. Let's see what this looks like. We're getting there. Well, it looks like we have some font issues. Let's go ahead and fix some of these last few styling issues. We want our register call to action to be a little bigger. And it sounds like create your account or get started is probably something a little nicer than just register. Same thing for create account, right? All right, this is a pretty good create account screen. There's a couple other things that I personally want to do. One, this is very much a captive portal, right? So once they go into this page, there's no way to get out. But both of our examples have a nice way to go to the login page once they're here, either here or here. Let's do what Stripe does and add a little link to the bottom to kick them out to the login page. Some of our colors are conflicting. Our UI library uses slate for everything, but I'm gonna go with a little more purplish look. All right, now we have our basic registration form set up. Create your account, captures the email, captures the password, and then there's a register action. But of course, this doesn't do anything yet. We haven't wired up the form. So let's go ahead and wire up the client side, and then we'll do the API route on the server side. Here, we need to capture the user information and then send it off to an API handler. We're not currently capturing any of the information, so let's go ahead and add some state for the email and the password. And now here, instead of doing nothing, we can make the API request that we know is going to fail till we make the handler. All right, let's go ahead and try it out, even though we know this isn't gonna work yet. Check out the console. Let's do test.test.com and register. All right, perfect. We're getting a 404, which means it didn't find our route handler, which we know because we haven't built it yet. Make sure you have your Docker database running, and let's go ahead and actually build that route handler. So we'll do API register route. Export async function post. So to add the user to our database, we have to read the incoming email and password. Now remember, the password sent to us is not going to be encrypted. So we have to encrypt the password using bcrypt, then we can save it to the database, and then finally, we can return some message to the user to let them know that the request was successful. All right, let's go ahead and give this a try. Refresh the page, clear all the logs. We'll do test at example.com, and then a password of whatever you want. Register? Said register. Let's take a look at the API request. 200 OK, the payload we sent, and the user we got back. So now we should be able to log in with this user. Test example.com. And we have successfully registered and signed in with our user. Fantastic. So we've created our form and the API route and created this flow end to end so the user can now register, which is awesome. But there's a couple of other edge cases that we probably want to handle before we really wrap this project up. For example, we don't have any validation on any of these fields. And specifically, we're not even saying if they're required or not. And then we're not handling any of the state with the button to disable it if required fields haven't been signed in yet. So there's a lot of nice little cleanup here that we can be doing. Let's run through and add some of that in now. The first thing we should do is once the user has successfully registered, we can kick them right on over to the sign-in page. Awesome. Next, we can go ahead and make these fields required. Let's take a look, refresh. Perfect. Now, we don't want to do a lot of validation client side. First of all, there's no guarantee that the user is going to be hitting this form on the client. They could make a curl request to your API or something else. Second, if you really want to test to see if an email is valid, the best way to do that is to send an email and see if they get it. Doing client-side validation isn't the greatest way to do any of that. However, we do want to let a user know if they tried to register and there was an error. Let's go ahead and build our own little alert component and show it to the user. So here, instead of just capturing the error and logging it, we'll actually save it to state and then display an alert. And then we'll toss it, well, let's do above the registration button. So now if we register with an email that we've already used, like test.example.com, we should get, Well, it's certainly failing, but it looks like we're not actually getting a nice error. Let's go ahead and jump back to our register route and surround list with the try catch. And then we can catch the error and respond with a nicer error message. So here we'll do new and here you might just have a generic error message if you want to hide the internals of what's happening, but for the purpose of demonstration, I'm just going to pass through the error message. You can add as much error handling logic here as you want. This is basically just a catch all to respond with a nice, pretty error message. Let's go ahead and try it out. Clear. So now we're getting a nicer error, but fetch only throws an exception if the network request itself fails. For example, if we go to the network here and we just go ahead and move us offline, clear everything, now we get our error message, failed to fetch. But what we really want is we want to say, well, if there's any sort of 500 or 400 or some other problem, go ahead and record that error too. So instead of checking just if res is okay, we can now go ahead and say, well, otherwise, set the error message to JSON and now if we bring ourselves back online, now it's working end to end. Let's make that error message a little nicer looking, and then we'll be in a pretty good place. All right, so the last thing I think that's good to make sure we're doing is to handle responsiveness in a pretty decent way. Here, well, it looks okay at larger sizes, but when it gets small, I just kind of put in a fixed width. So let's go ahead and make sure it gets a little smaller for those small sizes, and then we'll be in a good place. I actually really like what Mercury does here with their login page. When it gets too small, it loses the card and just kind of goes and melds into the background. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so now on small screens, it just blends nicely into the background. And on larger screens, it'll go ahead and adapt to kind of have a nice card look. Although there was that one small bug right here where the width of these things is not correct. And that's because this has a max width of small. So let's go ahead and delete that here and here. There we go. So now, boop, boop. So there you have it. You've successfully created a custom registration page for Next.auth end to end. It's the first thing your users are gonna see when they're entering in your SaaS application. So it's nice to spend a little bit of time here, make sure the branding is correct, and that it really acts as a great captive portal for your users. If you have any questions or any thoughts or anything, feel free to ask them in the comments. I love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and until next time, happy coding.